Hello everyone, this is Gary from timelinerastrology.com. This is an update on what I have been talking about for quite a while now, and that is the potential for a major market crash and the sort of economic fallout from that, and how I see this all playing out. Because I wanted to look at the recent events, the war breaking out in the Middle East again, and how that's impacted the world, how that will impact the world going forward, how that in a way has expressed Mars Ketu conjunction more especially in a way that I hadn't anticipated, I'll be honest. It's not that I hadn't anticipated major terrorist attacks, because that is a typical expression of Mars Ketu. Mars Ketu conjoined in any chart, in any individual's chart or by transit, is this kind of terrorist sort of configuration. So if somebody has that in their birth chart, they might be feeling terrorized by that particular person, that relationship, wherever that falls in their chart. So when it happens by transit, there usually is a terrorist attack. So that's not a hard call. But I hadn't anticipated the Middle East situation, of course, because we were looking at Ukraine. And so it was, in a way, just this. Most astrologers, I'm sure, and I have heard from other astrologers who were anticipating the Ukraine situation just escalating. And it isn't to say that it isn't escalating, by the way, because as we take our eyes off of Ukraine and look to the Middle East, indeed, Russia is advancing in Ukraine. So just be mindful of that. What we get through news media, it's only filtered through news media. Remember that. But at any rate, Mars Ketu, in a way, is expressing itself in, of course, the terrorist attacks, the escalation, the reigniting of the war in Israel. And in a way, the point about that is that is expressing Mars Ketu. If that didn't happen, then the other thing that we could say about Mars Ketu, and I think it still has the potential, is an economic downfall. Because of course, war and the economy go hand in hand. I mean, the fact is that wars are big business. Now, that might sound cynical, but the end of the day, if you look into this, whatever about your politics, whatever side you're on, there is this war machine that makes a lot of money. Countries have to actually make weapons and then sell them to other countries and all of that. So anyway, without getting into the whole sort of complex politics of all of this, because obviously this is like a really complicated situation in the Middle East and in the world over, and America getting pulled into this war, I'm not even sure that's the correct way of putting that. America is obviously very involved in this Middle Eastern war. Okay, I have to be mindful of my P's and Q's here, but that obviously isn't just about war, therefore, it's also about the economics of it. Although I had made a previous video about the Mars Ketu conjunction highlighting major stock market crashes in the past, and that has been the case over and over again, it also has been the case that terrorist attacks have, in a way, expressed that conjunction more than that. And this is a really important lesson for all of us astrologers and those who follow astrology, is that when you have a configuration, if it expresses itself in one way, it may be that it doesn't have to express itself in another way. And that if there weren't these attacks, this war, that there could have been this stock market crash, for example. Because the astrology has to express itself in some way. It just has to. And when I read charts for individuals, it's the same thing I say. So if somebody has a configuration like this in their birth chart, well, how do you find a way of expressing this so that you don't have to express it in this more negative way, in this way that you would prefer not to? And it's the same with everything in the chart. If you're aware of what this planet in this sign in this house represents, how could you express this in a way that you would prefer? Having said all of that, I still think that I kind of sense with the astrology and leading up to this eclipse as well by October 28th, but especially by the end of November, when Venus conjoins Ketu, I still feel like the other shoe is kind of like about to drop. Now, if you don't know what that expression means, it just means that it just feels like there's something that hasn't fully, it's like something major has happened, that's obvious, but something else is about to happen, I feel. And it's not just my feelings based on, oh, I just feel, I sense, it's my feelings based on looking at the astrology. So I'm going to show you this. So at the moment I'm recording this on October 23rd. This is a very sort of impromptu video that I'm going to make here and post today. And it's because I just wanted to, look at all of the astrology right now. Ketu, the South Node, again, a reminder, I use the sidereal zodiac, but whichever, zodiac you use, we're talking about the same conjunctions and all of that. It's just the signs that change. But that's going to obviously make a big difference here in terms of the nodes, for example, because they're just about to shift signs in the sidereal zodiac. Rahu in Aries is about to move into Pisces, either on October 30th or November 29th, depending on whether you use the mean or true node. That itself in November is going to be a really good lesson for all of us astrologers in how this is all panning out right now. We're getting a real important lesson, real time, in the nodes, because whatever way you look at it, I guess you could spin it whatever way you want. But Rahu in Aries obviously has got the kind of foot on the accelerator in the war machine, together with Jupiter and Uranus. But as soon as it moves into Pisces, you might say it takes the foot off the accelerator in one way, but in another way, it's a bit of a problem. And I'm going to tell you why, because let me bring this forward and you'll see. So once Rahu moves into Pisces and Ketu into Virgo, Rahu no longer is in Aries, but it's said to aspect Aries. It's got a 12th house aspect. It's like it leaves a shadow behind. It is a shadow after all. It's the eclipse. And Saturn no longer aspects Rahu. Because this is the main point I actually want to make in this video, is that, and I mentioned this in the video I made about the possible stock market crash, is that Saturn could be the sort of savior, saving the day, in that Saturn in Aquarius aspects Aries. It's this sextile aspect that Saturn in Vedic astrology is said to have 100% force or aspect, drishti. So Saturn in Aquarius is containing, in a way, the Aries. And I said in the video previously that I thought this could be, our savior. The thing is that as soon as Rahu moves into Pisces, Saturn is no longer aspecting Rahu. And Rahu continues to aspect Jupiter in Aries. And now Saturn and Rahu and Mars, all of them aspect Jupiter, Uranus in Aries. So that's a bit worrisome, to say the least, because now we have a situation where Rahu is kind of given free rein where it wasn't previously, and things could really escalate quite quickly into November. And they could escalate, of course, in the war, literally the Middle East war, and how it can pull in the whole region and even further afield. And I do believe, and I'm going to make a separate video on this, and I'm going to do a live presentation for people to join and have a discussion about all of this. I'm going to discuss world war and how I believe that we are in a world war already, and that we have to think of it that way so that we take sort of the fear out of, oh, are we heading for World War III? Let's just say we are in a world war. It's just going to escalate and de-escalate at different times. And a world war in this day and age is very different to World War I or World War II. And we have to think like that. It's not going to be the same kind of war. It's going to be fought very differently. But it's obviously going to have a huge impact on the economy. And again, war is like a money-making machine as well on the other side. So if you think about that, anyway, I don't want to get into that again. Okay, I'm not going to go down that road again. But let's face it, war is a money-making machine. The thing is that I also see this as being potentially problematic for the economy, because what can you see here? You see Rahu, Saturn, and Mars all aspecting Aries, and Jupiter retrograde in Aries until the end of the year. And at this stage as well, in November, you see Venus, the other planet, along with Jupiter, that represents the economy in many ways, because Jupiter is about growth in the economy, and that's going through some interesting things right now. And Venus represents money. And Jupiter is now aspected by all three of the malefics, Rahu, Saturn, Mars, in Aries, Mars' sign. And although Mars, in a way, looks after its own sign by aspect, it's still a tricky situation. And Jupiter itself is retrograde and now no longer with Rahu, sort of containing Rahu. Now Rahu is in Jupiter sign Pisces, aspecting Jupiter in Aries. So you can see how this war and economy situation combined is going to create a really tricky situation here into November and beyond. And I'm kind of looking at this in the further afield and looking at next year, 2024, and how this could play out. And I do feel like the next few months, especially until May 2024, is precarious to say the least. And I think that if we could make it to May 2024 without this breaking out, in a major way, and with if we're to avoid a major meltdown by May, I think we're kind of through the worst of it. It's like it's precarious to say the least until May. May has got some better significations because of simply, well, one thing is Jupiter moves into Taurus. Jupiter then is no longer aspected by Rahu, and it's no longer in Aries, fueling this war and wars. And so it moves into Taurus along with Uranus by June. And I feel like that's that might be a whole other thing, this kind of economic shakeup, but it just looks more hopeful from the summer of 2024. We just need to make it till there first. But in November, back to November, November is the tricky part because again, Jupiter aspected by all these malefics, and then Venus in its debilitation in Virgo, sidereal Virgo, conjoined Ketu, the South Node that really started off this whole war in Israel. So this is the economic fallout, I feel. This is the potential in the immediate time frame in November. And again, because of Jupiter and its aspects, I think that it's just Mars is then having to meet Pluto next year, then Saturn, then Rahu, one thing after another in the new year. And again, until we make it to May, I think we're going to have a lot of escalation, a lot of tension. Obviously, this is going to go on for months and years, in fact, but definitely for the next few months, we're going to see some major issues and how that could impact the world in a broader way. So that's what I wanted to say. And again, I want to say that the Saturn could save the day. It could still save the day because even though it doesn't aspect Rahu, it's still aspecting Aries. Saturn is currently stationed at 6 degrees by the beginning of November. By 4th of November, it was stationed direct at 6 degrees, where it just so happens to be where the moon is in the American independence chart. And that's a whole stalemate going on in the US as well, by the way, because of the whole Speaker of the House and all of that. I mean, you can see how this is all playing out. Everything is happening exactly as it should. But it's also showing that there's some major stalling here, and that is adding to this complication and how anyway, I don't want to get into the whole politics of the US, but basically, the Saturn stationing direct in November is another complexity. But in another way, I think, again, it's funny to say this, but I think Saturn could be saving the day in many ways. It could be containing the situation with Aries. It could be slowly moving things forward here, very strongly placed in Aquarius. Subsequently, Mars goes into Scorpio. Mars in Scorpio, although combust, is in its own sign. Saturn in Aquarius is in its own sign. Venus in Libra, by December, it's in its own sign. By December, if we can get through this November period without a major fallout, then we could be okay in terms of the economy. However, again, it's still a Mars combustion, and that's the war machine driving forward. I mean, yes, it's also Scorpio, which is going to highlight and bring to light many things that were hidden. And that could be also in terms of the war and invested interest in all of that. I don't want to go down that road, but let's just say Scorpio is hidden and it's going to bring things to light in December, more so from the middle of November into December. But if we could make it to this part in December, where things look a bit, I don't know, it's still precarious, but it's still probably an improvement on November. November is a particularly complicated month in terms of wars, in terms of the economy, in terms of just general feeling, sensing that everything's going to be okay. It's probably not going to feel okay in November. And that is adding to this potential for all these other problems that arise from what's happening right now. Anyway, so that's where I'm going to leave it for now. I do feel like we're in a very precarious situation globally. Individually, of course, we can make the most of these transit, and it's very different for the individual than it is for the global. And that's always the case. So make the most of these transits in a way. And into November, I would say use them to overcome issues, to, you know, push through an issue. It's probably not the best time though in our relationships. It's probably not going to be the easiest time. Because if you are pushing through an issue, it's likely that you're going to rub people up the wrong way, and you're going to have some fallouts with people, and there's going to be a lot of issues. Globally, that just expands and exaggerates into themes of war and all of that. Make the most of these transits, and whatever happens on the world stage, we have to do that. That's all we can do individually. So I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions about any of that, please feel free to post below. If you have any comments, I would love to hear your comments. We shall see how this pans out, of course. And until next time.